Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Pastor Suzanne Parker Miller with Pastors for North Carolina Children, and we're talking about advocacy today. So we're glad you're here. So when we talk about advocacy and the work that we're doing, there's really two main types of advocacy. There's individual advocacy, and then there's systems advocacy. Individual advocacy we can think about as one person talking about, one type of situation, one small thing. It's usually done on a very small or local basis. And it's very specific to one or just a couple of individuals. More often, we talk about systems advocacy or advocacy to change a broader system or a problem that's existing within the community that's affecting a lot of people. Something that's going to need to change and that there's laws and policies and things like that that need to change. And so that is affecting a system within the greater community that we live in. There are a lot of different skills when we think about advocacy, things that we can do in participating in advocacy. A lot of times that's meeting with people who are decision makers or who have power and establishing a relationship with them. You'll hear me mention relationship a few times. Advocacy is based in relationship because we want people to know who we are, understand where we stand or what we believe in or what we're pushing for them to do. And we want to have that happening more than just once. Advocacy one time is good. Advocacy over and over again, sustained, is often what it really takes to be able to bring change to problems. Um, you can also participate in advocacy by attending events, protests, events, gatherings, rallies, that type of thing. Also mobilizing and building within your community. Advocacy happens by building people power. And so we do that by engaging with more than just one small group, getting outside of our silos and being able to bring in more and more people to do the work of advocacy. And obviously, it goes without saying, it involves speaking out. Now, not everybody is going to be the one at the front with the bullhorn leading the charge or at the microphone with with the press standing there, but it does involve us using our voices and standing with those who are using their voices. It also involves writing, spreading the message via, you know, traditional media, using letters to the editors, op-eds, those types of things, or social media, posting things online, sharing things for, wider audiences that way. And one of the things I thought was interesting, these are some notes from a friend of mine that I received from Jennifer. She said, create and share truthful content. And I think that these days is more important than ever. Not just that you're speaking out, but that people know and can trust what you're saying is grounded and, connected into fact and, official information, that you're not just shouting opinion, that there is research and data to back up what you're saying, or, you're a trusted source. That goes a long way to being in relationship and to be able to be somebody that others can count on, to listen, and to know that you're speaking truth. Um, One that we don't often think about is preserving institutional memory. So often when we see a problem and we want to jump in and we're enthusiastic and we want to fix a problem, we think we may be the first ones that have ever done this work, or that this is the first time this problem has come up. And in reality, there are often a lot of times where situations and people in our past have done this work, or other groups and institutions have done this work. And so having someone with a sense of history and the sense of understanding what has happened in the past and preserving that for us into the future can be really, really beneficial, because all of our work is standing on the shoulders of those that have come before us. And, there's often groups who have done this, may not be the exact same work, but very, very connected work that we can learn from and learn what worked and didn't work from them. And then last, the research and analysis. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but understanding what's working, what's not working, and how do we fix it, and what actually is the underlying issue is a huge piece of this entire concept of advocacy. So, thinking about not only advocacy, as just people, as citizens, but as people of faith. This for me is the part that is so compelling and why I do the work that I do. Because for me, I cannot separate this work of speaking up for others, speaking up for my neighbor, from my own faith and the call that we have from Jesus to love our neighbor. And so a couple of verses, and there's lots and lots, but I just grabbed a couple to be able to share is looking from the prophets, the prophet Micah, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. This one's such a famous one that we hear often. There's also Isaiah speaking up of, leading to do seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. These are the folks in our communities who are the most vulnerable. Those are the people that Jesus was most concerned with, the prophets were most concerned with, making sure that the most vulnerable in our community have what they need. And that is who we are called to also, lift up and support. Now here's from the Gospels from Luke 4. Jesus talks in his first sermon, which is he goes into Nazareth. He opens the scroll of Isaiah in the temple and he starts reading to them. And this is sometimes called his first sermon in Nazareth. And he reads these words from Isaiah. He has appointed me the to where I can read the screen. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed to go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And this is not just bringing good news. This is only bringing good news if it's good news to the poor. If our good news, if evangelion, if our evangelism, if our work is not bringing good news to those who are most vulnerable in our community, the poor, then it's not really what Jesus is talking about. And so for me, that is a really, really key verse. It has to be good news to the poor. And the former president of Sojourners, Jim Wallace is famous for saying if it's not good news to the poor, then it's not good news at all. So thinking about that type of work, with advocacy. Another quote that I really enjoy is this one from, he's a pastor in Chicago, Dr. Micah Edmondson, is you cannot love your neighbor while supporting or accepting systems that exploit and dehumanize them. You cannot love your neighbor while accepting less for them and their families than you do for you and your own. And so, as we think about who is our neighbor and who it is that we are advocating for and advocating with, these are questions for me that come to mind. And in many ways, the parable of the Good Samaritan often, is one that comes to mind as well. Jesus is tested. A lawyer stands up to test him and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus tells him, the Shema, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself, quoting from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And then the neighbor goes on and says, is pushing and pushing and push, or the lawyer's pushing and pushing and says, who is my neighbor? And that's when we receive the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And Jesus makes it clear that it's not just a parable about, the neighbor being the person who lives directly next door to you. But in this parable, Jesus absolutely expands our definition of neighbor to one that is very broad and includes everybody around us. And the rabbi at the March on Washington, Rabbi Prince says, in the realm of the spirit, our Father taught us thousands of years ago that when God created man, he created him as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term. It's a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. And so, as I think about the work that I do as a person of faith and as an advocate, this is my grounding in the scripture and in my understanding of who our neighbors are, who we are called to help. And that, yes, it is the people who live directly around me, but it is so much broader than that. It is so much bigger. And it includes those who I may not want to love, but I'm called to. It includes those who may be very difficult to love. It includes those who I may not have anything in common with. But all of these people are not just others and them over there. They are my neighbors, and I'm called to make sure that they are able to experience, the care and community that I have, the love in the community, and that I have that to show to them. Let me stop there. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Does that resonate with you all?
I would say so. This is Mary Thorpe. Um, as you're talking and telling us these wonderful ways to be a good human, I can't help but think the way things are right now and what a what a paradox it is. It's just a little unsettling, more than a little unsettling.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you. It is, it is hard it is hard to sit and know that this is what I believe and then yet look out and see how I would say, this understanding of neighbor has just kind of been
Oh,
disregarded or
yeah,
flipped on its head and, in a
indeed.
very different interpretation of scripture than what I would recognize a
Yeah.
lot of times.
I think it's interesting the perspective you put on the good news to the poor, in that passage because I had not thought about it in that way of like not like bring good news to the poor, but if the news you're bringing isn't good to the poor, if it isn't positive for the poor, it's not good news, and I think that's a different spin that I hadn't, I think about, well, do good because we're supposed to, bring this news to the poor, right? But in a bigger context, that's a really great way to look at that scripture and to expand on it, not just do the good work, but is the work I'm doing, would I bring it to the poor? Not I'm doing good work for the poor, but would I bring this to them? Would, if I said, this is it, does it fit into that? Not the other way, or not I'm doing it to fit in that.
Right. And it also puts the understanding of what is good news on those who are receiving from us instead of us telling them what is good news. This is good for you. No,
Right.
no, no, no. It's what they think is good that we can help bring about. Which is a very different flip from so often what well, I'm going to give you this because this is what you need. And it's like, that may not actually be what they need. We have to be in relationship to understand that, as well.
Someone once told me that you don't get to decide if you're someone's ally.
Hmm.
They get to decide if you're ally. You do the work, you do whatever it is you're going to do, but you don't get to say, I'm an ally because I'm doing XYZ. They say, I see you as an ally because you're doing maybe it's ABC, um, so yeah, that goes
Such a
right
good
hand
point.
in hand with that.
Yes, it absolutely, that's such a great point. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Because yeah, I can't tell you whether I'm a safe person to someone or I'm an ally to them. They have to make those determinations. All I can do is do the best that I can. And when we know better, we do better, which is, I think, applies in so many situations. Well, when we think about faith and politics, one of the questions that I get so often is, but churches can't do politics, can they? Churches shouldn't do politics. How do you do church and politics? Like, what? How does that work? Variations of that. I get tons and tons of questions about it. So I think it's important that we stop and break down what politics means and maybe what some other things mean as we think about it. So politics is the relationship within a group or organization when one has power over another. So whether that's our elected officials, whether that's, within different groups, however we define the power, somebody having power. But if we think back to what politics means originally in the original Greek, it's much more of the ways that we get along within a community. How does a community govern itself? How do we make laws and rules to be able to live together in community? That is what the ultimate original definition of politics really is. Um, and so politics in our world governs everything that we do. One time I heard a pastor say, and I really wish I could quote who it was, but I didn't catch the name at the time. But the pastor said, when you were born, you were given a birth certificate from the government. When you die, your family receives a death certificate from the government. Everything in your life, from beginning to end, includes politics and the connections with the government. We cannot separate ourselves from that, at least within the US context. And so, you know, politics, if we're not dealing with politics as people of church, of people of faith, if we're not dealing with the connections in our communities, how are we loving our neighbors? How are we getting along in community? How are we engaging in basic life together if we're not dealing with politics? That would be my take on it. I recognize some people may disagree with me. The thing for me that's the problem is not the politics, but the partisanship. Partisanship is the issue that we have to address and face and deal with, um, that makes the difference. And that is they define as a strong and sometimes blind adherence to a particular party, faction, cause, or person. And when we put partisanship and our loyalty to one person, party, thing, group over the good of the whole community, and what's good for the poor, not just for us, that is when we get into, issues around dealing with politics. It's the partisanship really underneath things that's problematic. Having said that, I recognize it is very difficult sometimes to separate those things, especially in real life situations. And so, as a nonprofit, I have to be nonpartisan in my work. But at the same time, it is difficult. I will say in my North Carolina context, I get equally, sometimes not maybe equally, but I get upset with both major parties because in my work with education, neither party gets to argue that they are the party of public education. In my view, I take issue with both. So in some ways for me, that's an easy way to maintain the nonpartisan part because neither party is doing a great job. Um, at times though, that does make it a little harder to navigate, how you do this work. Um, but as I was saying, churches and nonprofits cannot and should not be partisan. We must maintain our nonpartisan status. What that allows us to do is to advocate for positions on bills or positions on issues without advocating for candidates or political parties. So as long as we're encouraging you to vote, we can't tell you how to vote. We can, I can advocate for public education, but I can't say you should go out and vote for X, Y, or Z, because that would be crossing the line. And there are federal legal definitions. It is a little bit, more complicated than that. But for me, if I'm sticking with a position that I support, you know, reducing hunger or eliminating, hunger, then that is a nonpartisan position. And I often will say, if we must be partisan, we are partisan on the side of the poor and the vulnerable only. I am partisan on the side of the poor. And, that is not partisan on either major political party. They certainly are, neither one are doing a very good job a lot of days helping. So, what are the goals of advocacy? When we think about public education advocacy, the goal is to move the needle. And to move the needle, sometimes that means a little bit, sometimes that means a lot. But when we think about this work of systems advocacy at a a macro level, at a large overview level, we are trying to move the needle towards a more active ally position. From wherever someone is, to move them maybe one notch closer to being an active ally. What that means for me is that I'm not actively seeking out those who are absolutely against the work that I'm doing and trying to convert them from, their view to my view. That's a 180-degree flip. That's not something that I necessarily can make happen. That is something that's going to happen through their own heart and their own conscience and their own research and understanding. What I'm trying to do is get those who may be in a position where they're neutral or they're passive to being a little bit more engaged. And so for me, that's a freeing idea. It's not that I have to go out and engage somebody who is absolutely the opposite view from me. I'm trying to engage those around me who may be like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, to actually getting involved and making phone calls and doing the work that's necessary to get, the positions changed that I want changed. Does that make sense? I want to stop there real quick. Any questions?
That actually makes you feel better about things
It does. I really do
because
think
you're
it's
looking for people that maybe are marginal in what they're thinking, but you could just engage them and get and win as opposed to beating your head against the wall.
absolutely, Chris. That is absolutely, for me, that is one of the ways I keep going because
Yeah.
I know that by speaking out, I have a chance to just move a needle a little bit. And I don't have to, the only way I'm successful, if I see it as the only way I'm successful is if I get the needle all the way to the opposite direction, 180 degrees. I'm never going to do that for something. I'm never going to have that happen, most likely. I mean, it could, but it would be really, really a lot of work and not something that I can engage in on a regular basis. What I want to do is try to get people just one more spot,
Well, and
maybe a little bit more engaged.
taking that idea, you're apt to try if
Right.
there's a hope that you can achieve something as opposed to no achievement at all.
Exactly. And this also is often done, I'll say, through storytelling, telling the stories of what we have, what we're dealing with and what the people are dealing with that we're working with. Sharing their stories is the way we move the needle so often. I had somebody ask me one day about, dealing with those who are in the active opposition, the 180-degree viewpoint. And they said, well, shouldn't you engage with them too? And I said, yes, we absolutely should engage in conversation, but that's going to take a different skill set. That is taking, somebody who has the time and the energy and the effort, willingness to sit and be in relationship and be in conversation and listen and try to understand their viewpoint and do that really labor intensive work of trying to get somebody to make the 180-degree switch. And there is value in that. And that is awesome. And that is a skill set that some people have. That is not a skill set that I personally have a lot of, desire to do because for me, it's one person at one time, and I'm much more interested in a larger, moving the needle a little bit for a larger group of people. But it's a both and. It really is a both and type situation. All of it is needed. So how do we do this advocacy? That's the big question that folks want to, often engage. So things that we need to consider. I'll say one of the reasons that this presentation is a lot more words than just pictures is because I'll be able to share it with you afterwards and then you'll have this to go back and reference. So I apologize for so many words, but hopefully that will be helpful in the end. But these are just some questions that I have to consider or that I think we should consider as we begin this process. If we're going to start working on an advocacy concern or situation, these are things we need to wrestle with. Who is most harmed by the problem? A lot of times the work that I care about, or that I'm most interested in, I may not be the person who is most harmed, but I still really care about it. And so identifying who is the most harmed, it might be you, it might be someone else, but understanding who that is helps us to then also know who we need to engage in the work, and to figure out who we need to follow, who's doing the work already. If someone is, let's say, you know, there's a church near my area that's dealing with some flooding issues. And so I care about the neighborhood. It's where my kid's school is. I want to know and get involved in that. But like what solution is that church seeking? What solution are those who are being most harmed? What do they want? Because I may walk in and say, "Oh, this is what we should do," but I'm not the person who really knows exactly the best idea, perhaps, because I'm not the one most affected. But then as we figure out who are most affected, how can we walk alongside them? Especially as people with our own privileges, with our own experiences, those of us who may be, middle class, upper middle class, have some education, have some wealth, family background experience, all of those things, how can we walk alongside those who are the most vulnerable and the ones experiencing the greatest effects of the problem? And then thinking about who else is working on it. You know, there are a lot of people already doing good work out there. And so we don't need to reinvent wheels. Please, please, please don't reinvent wheels. Find the people who are doing the work and engage with them. Bring your ideas to the table, get involved in, with folks, but we don't need to just go out and create a new thing just to create a new thing. I see that happen so often and it drives me crazy. Um, but maybe there is a hole somewhere that, is work that's not happening, and that would be a place to plug in and create something. But often, there are people already working on whatever the issue is that you're concerned about. And then thinking about what type of commitment we can make to this work. Is this something that you have a lot of time to put toward over a long period of time? Maybe you're retired, maybe you have some free time, those types of things. You want to put time into it. Maybe you're looking for something that you can engage with once and you're not going to be able to continue to do it lots and lots. Those are different types of advocacy work that happens. And so we need to be aware of, what we can give. And then how do we leverage our privilege? How do we use the resources that we have to be able to help the most? Who can we network and connect with to bring into the connection, the work that's happening to be able to help move it further? And then what might the barriers be? How might this cost us? How might, our own background and experiences from the way we grew up or where we live, how might that help us or not help us? And how might it hinder us from seeing what is going on, and be a blind spot? So just having these things, none of these are to say start or stop the work. These are all just things to consider because advocacy is a long-term marathon. The work of advocacy is generally not very quick. It is not work that's going to happen and you're all of a sudden going to get an answer and it's going to be fixed right away. Those things happen, but it's very rare. Most of the time when we're working on systems change, we're working on a 10 to 12 year time frame for some things. I was talking with legislators. I was in DC a couple weeks ago working on some public education work, and meeting with legislators and stuff. And some of the things that were being talked about had been in process for 10 years that it took to build the momentum to be able to get things passed. So when we think in those terms, we have to be sure we're in it for the long haul. We don't want to, get involved a whole lot really fast and then just burn out. That doesn't really help the long-term cause. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is understanding, what is at stake in a situation to help us to be able to do this work. And so looking at a power analysis, or, understanding the deeper issues at play is really, really important to know where the levers are that you can press to be able to make change happen. And so I wanted to give this example just quickly, as one example from my own work, things that we have to think about, for you all, because this is the case in every situation. Who is at play, who's at power, who has the ability to change things, so that we know where to press, who to talk to. So if we think about an issue within public schools, say, around in my area, there's a lot of issues around bus drivers. Like, we don't have enough bus drivers. We're having bus driver shortages. Why can't we keep bus drivers? Why can't we get the kids to school on time, or home on time? There's a lot of issues with that. And I had meetings with PTA. I'm on the PTA at my kid's school, and we had meetings talking to parents about it. And every parent was upset with the principal. Every single person was upset at the principal. Well, unfortunately, the principal's not the person who can actually fix that problem. He cares about it. He's invested in it. He wants the kids home, sooner too, but he doesn't have the ability to fix it. So we have to stop and say, who actually has the power to make the decisions that could affect the issue? If I worked with a group one time who was wanting to do local work in our county around food and nutrition for children for lunch. Really important. Let's get them good lunches. Let's make sure kids have food. Absolutely 100% agree. Except that we were supposed to focus on county leaders to be able to fix the problem. There again, county issues wasn't the place where we could actually work, because food in schools is a Department of Agriculture issue at a federal level, because that's where the school lunch program comes from. It comes out of the farm bill in the federal government and part of the budget. So if you want to work on funding for schools, most of the time you're dealing with the Department of Agriculture at a federal level, not at a county level. And so we have to be sure that we know where things happen. So if we look at Wisconsin and think about your situation, I know you all have an election today, correct?
Oh,
And
yes.
your Secretary of Education or Secretary of Public Instruction is actually one of the ballot people I saw as I was doing some research.
Yes.
So, how does that position, or how do these positions play out for Wisconsin? At a federal level, we have Congress making laws around education. We have the Supreme Court when we think about things like Brown versus Board of Education, and education cases. There's lots of them. The Secretary of Education, the Department of Education, for as long as it still exists, those are people who have stake in education policy. The Department of Agriculture, like I mentioned, for food policy. And then we think about, the state level for you in Wisconsin. You have your legislature. Your legislature has rules and laws around public ed. You have a state Supreme Court. I don't know of cases specifically, but I'm confident that there are cases that involve public ed. Um, I know in North Carolina, that's a huge piece of it for us because of our 30-year court case around public education that we're still dealing with. And then you have your Department of Public Instruction and your state superintendent. It was interesting as I did some research that Wisconsin does not have a state level school board. I thought that was interesting, because you're one of a very few states who doesn't. So I'm really curious about that, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. But then you look at your local level and the local decisions that can be made, and the local school board in your area certainly holds a lot of the power there, especially because they hold taxing authority. So if you want to look at school funding things, you're looking at, your local school board, the district superintendent for whichever district it is. There's multiple in Door County, so which one or ones are you working with there? and then we get to the principal and the teacher. Um, but it really is important that we stop and do an analysis of the power of whatever the situation is. Because even if it's not education, this same type of structure applies to just about any issue that you're going to be wanting to deal with. And so these are just a couple of things that we can talk about with, ways to use our voices. Speaking at meetings is a really important thing, whether that's at a school board meeting, a county commission meeting, city council, going to Madison and speaking at legislative events, that type of thing. There's lots that you can do. We mentioned letters to the editor, writing, those are opportunities. Um, and just trying to connect and network with people who are doing this work to support that work, in a variety of ways through that coalition work is important. One of the things that we, as we talk about organizing and getting to, work with others who are doing the work, these are a few of the things that I've really come to learn over the years, that it's really important that we narrow our focus of the work that we want to do. I know when I first started getting involved in this work, years and years ago, um, I cared about everything, and I still do. I care about lots and lots and lots of issues. But I quickly realized that if I focused on all of them, then I wasn't going to actually have the energy and the ability to get things done. So I had to really narrow my focus. So that's when I chose education, public education, to really focus in on. And even that sometimes is way too wide. So sometimes we have to really drill down and focus on a very specific piece of it, um, and go deeper in our understandings of that work. And then, also focusing on the small steps and the small wins that you can get along the way, because that's what helps keep you going, because the big wins just take so, so long. As I mentioned, don't reinvent the wheels. Find people who are doing the work and join in. And that often causes or requires us to put our egos aside. One of the things that gets in the way of this work is people focusing on who's going to get the credit for it. And, if we can step back and put our egos aside and say, you know what, it doesn't matter whether I get the credit or not. I just want the work to get done. I just want the change to happen. I don't need to be the one who takes the credit for it. That can be a really freeing, um, and productive opportunity that it creates. It's also really hard to do. That's not our normal nature as most people. Um, I will say also to listen to and follow the lead of those who are more marginalized, especially our Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders. That is something that I have learned over the years, over and over again, is to listen to Black women. They have been doing this work and doing this work for decades so often. And, even in the civil rights movement, we're often overlooked. And so, listening to them, they know what they're doing, and we just need to follow their lead a lot of times, especially as white leaders in communities. Um, and then I'll say, look for unlikely allies. Who might be people that you might not think would be an ally that would be working on this cause, or that somebody you're like, I don't know if I really want to work with them or not, but they're actually doing good work and they might help us. Sometimes it can create, odd pairings of people, but that can actually be helpful. Building coalition across groups who look like they at the surface may not get along can actually be really helpful. I do a lot of interfaith work here, and so having a press conference or a prayer vigil where you show up and you have a Muslim imam, you have a Jewish rabbi and a Christian pastor show up and all speak together with one voice saying, we support whatever it is, our schools. That really, really brings power. And some people might say, "Oh, well, you're a church group. Why would you do that?" We actually it makes it stronger. And so I wanted to just share a couple things with Wisconsin specifically. One of the questions I often get is, who represents me? People, at least if you're anything, and I know Wisconsin is similar to North Carolina and a lot of the turmoil you all have experienced in the years past, you know, my legislators keep changing. What district I'm in, North Carolina has been redistricted so many times. So it's hard to keep up with who my legislators actually are. And so I have to stop and look that information up on a relatively regular basis. It seems like I think they've changed every 2 years for the last decade plus for me, which districts I'm in. And so, finding out who your legislators are, and then also with Congress, which leaders you have in Congress, put them in your phone as a contact. Save that information because that is important. And, knowing them, being able to make a phone call quickly and easily, to be able to share your opinion is really, really helpful, that you already have it. The Five Calls app is another one that can be really helpful. Do any of you, um, have you used the Five Calls app or have you heard of it before? Chris? Awesome.
Yes.
It's a neat app. It's also a website, but if you go to the app store, you can download it and it'll take your address and information and tell you who your legislators are, but they also give you scripts. So you'll tell them like three, or you pick from a list of things that you're interested in, and they'll go through and help you to kind of know what you might ask for if you make a phone call so that it guides you through the process, which is really, really helpful. Especially.
Also a good resource if you're writing letters to the editor or to your Congress people too.
Absolutely, yes. And they give you a lot of like links and fact sheet stuff that helps,
Mhm.
to be able to have that information. Um, and so I sent you all the survey about some areas of, justice and advocacy work. This is certainly an incomplete list. There's no way to list them all, but I just thought it would be interesting to kind of poll, your group and see what people were most interested in. And I'll share this information with Pastor Don, to be able to have for the congregation. But it was interesting that, um, the two top vote getters for either people already working on it or interested in working on it was the issues around food insecurity and hunger and education. And so these were the other top vote getters. Creation care, democracy, abuse, and disability were all equally, indicated as well. But I thought, I would offer, a couple of resources for you around food insecurity specifically and education, especially since that's my focus area. I have a few connections in Wisconsin. So one, has your congregation ever been connected with Bread for the World or done anything with their offering of letters work? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. So Bread for the World is a national, international organization working on hunger relief. They do both national organizing and international organizing. And so wherever you want to focus on hunger, they have lots of information. They are really, really awesome. And so Nicole Schmidt is the organizer for the Midwest. So I put her information there. If anybody is interested, she would be a great resource for your area. Um, they do bread offers every spring. It's coming up in a few weeks, actually, like right after Easter, I think. They do a program called Offering of Letters, where they invite congregations to write letters to their legislator. They give you sample letters, and you handwrite the letters or type them if you want. But they invite you to bring them in on a Sunday morning, put them in the offering plate type thing, pray over them, and then have them sent to to your legislators. They also offer Sunday worship event resources and things like that to be able to do an entire service around hunger and focus on that. Um, and so they have tons of resources on their website. When I was in DC 2 weeks ago, we actually were at the Bread for the World office, having our meeting. Our conference, for advocacy was based there. And so we got to meet with them and talk, and they're just doing some incredible work. This is their 50th anniversary. So they've also been around a long time and have just a ton of experience to be able to share, for congregations across the country who, are connected. They are also having a conference in June in DC specifically for hunger relief, and that would be a great thing to take a few folks and go if you have the opportunity. I know there's a congregation in Winston-Salem who's looking at going, a Moravian congregation who's looking at going and taking people. So something to think about. I also looked up some information around hunger in Door County and put a link there. They listed a couple of organizations that are working in the Door County area. You all probably already know about those opportunities, but there are folks doing work in Door County, and so there's some ways to engage in that. Have any of you all done any of the like advocacy work around food insecurity there? Like talking with legislators or county folks?
No.
You probably contribute to a food bank or get involved in some type of work otherwise though, right? I would guess.
Yeah, I mean the only hunger stuff that I actively participated in was when it came when there was lots of talk about continuing free meals at school, lunches and breakfasts. And so I actively talked to legislators. I talked to people that I knew who were friends with those legislators who were
Mhm.
also educators and said, "You're an educator. You know how this affects kids. This
Right.
is your friend." And I know sometimes those lines are blurred. And you don't want to, you want to keep that separate, but at the same time, like you have a unique perspective and an ear for this person. Like, please give them a nudge as an educator and say, as an educator, you see the value in this. Didn't
Exactly.
help. We didn't get them in Wisconsin,
Keep
but
fighting. Keep
but
fighting.
right. But I still have the discussions. But that's been like the biggest um, advocacy work aside from service and and helping pantries and that kind of stuff.
A
That's
number, a number
And
of years, this is Kathleen, a number of years ago, for this church and others, there was some kind of hunger walk. There was a couple that came every year for
crop
years.
walk.
The
Crop
crop
yeah,
walk.
yeah. What
Mhm.
wasn't that
that's
kind of
Church World Services, yeah.
okay?
Another great organization. Yeah, absolutely. I just listed two here. There's lots, obviously, but yeah, crop walk is another great way to get involved. And if you're gonna have people walk, maybe there's a way to include, some phone calls in the preparation or afterwards to call and talk about why you did it. Sharing your story of why you engaged in the work. Why do you care? Why would somebody go? And I know I used to do crop walk and it was like 9 miles on a Sunday afternoon, through downtown Winston-Salem or whatever. And it's like, why would I do that? Because I care, but then sharing that story, of why you care and who that it might affect can just be really, really empowering to, inform.
Several years ago, Dawn suggested a friend and I help her out with checking out resources for Door County people who didn't have didn't have health care or didn't have, just basically make a list of things that people could go to and find so they could get help.
Hmm.
And out of that came, this is our 9th year of a pet pantry. We donate dog food and cat food, which sounds tangential to what you're saying,
No,
but
it's
it's to a
important.
food pantry up here based on the fact that if, people are struggling, why should they have to not have their pets around? So that it was a long circuitous path to get there, but it came from that, just looking for resources for people to use who are struggling financially.
That's awesome. And that's a great example of, doing some of that power analysis and research of like, what are the needs, what are the opportunities? I'm doing a class right now on asset-based community development and that community mapping of, what's out there because we
Mhm.
need to know that and where are the holes? That's a perfect example. You all found a hole, in the community, there was a need and you filled it. And awesome. I mean, that's huge. That's important work. Um, so that's great. And then maybe the next step is, okay, well, where are the ways we can work on policy that might, allow people to keep their pets or not be struggling in the same way that food is an issue for their pets. There's lots of questions we can look at around that. That's wonderful work, really. And it is, our pets matter too. They're part of our family. They are really, they may be the only stable thing that a family has, or a kid has to rely on when things are tough. Um,
Mhm.
that's really important. Looking at education, and that was something you all also mentioned. The Wisconsin Public Education Network. Have you ever heard of the Wisconsin Public Ed Network? Um, so my friend Heather runs that. She's, I think, the director of it. And so she had reached out when I posted about, that I was working with a congregation in Wisconsin. She reached out and was like, "Be sure you tell them, about our work." And so I wanted to mention that. So her email address is linked there. I'll share the slides so you can click on the links and be able to get connected to stuff, but they're doing lots of great work. Though I looked and I didn't see anything connected in Door County specifically. So that is something that would be an opportunity. They're looking for groups in all your different counties and all the different areas. So there might be some opportunities there to get connected in with folks, in other parts of the state also working on public ed. They're doing really great work. I actually should see Heather this weekend. We're going to the Network for Public Education conference, that's in Columbus. I'm driving to Columbus, Ohio on Friday. And so I'll get to see Heather this weekend. So I'm really excited, to reconnect. It's kind of the big family reunion for the education community. Um, and then another, and possibly seen as an unlikely ally, but the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. That's another national organization. I don't see them as an unlikely ally because I think they're a great group of people, and I believe in a strong separation of church and state personally. But some people are like, really? Question that perhaps, but they have great information on their website around public school voucher or private school vouchers specifically, and pulling money away from public schools, which is something that my organization works on, trying to keep public money in public schools. And then thirdly, along the same lines, Public Funds for Public Schools is another great organization. And these are all, we all work together, at different levels nationally as well. So those are a couple of resources. Let me stop there and see if there's any other questions.
No, I'll just say on the education bit, I'm a former school board member. I work at school. That's why I'm like exhausted and yawning. Pardon me. I was with fourth graders all day.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. God bless you.
yeah. So, but like in Door County, we're Gibraltar, like my school district, Gibraltar, like up by where our church is. We're kind of an anomaly because like a majority, like 90% of our funding comes from our local tax dollars.
Mhm. Yeah.
We don't in Northern Door County, there are no voucher school options in like that are easily accessible. Like if a family chose to send their child to a boarding school or something like that, they could do that if they wanted to drive to Sturgeon Bay. There are a couple of religious schools down there, but I think like it's interesting because it's like we forget that we are part of those issues sometimes because they aren't, you're right, they don't
Right.
always directly affect us.
Mhm.
Our bigger thing is like special education funding, holding our educational institutions to follow the laws. And in Wisconsin, without that state school board,
Mhm.
our biggest like recourse is to go to the National Department of Education. There is not really enforcers in the state of Wisconsin. So to get laws and enforced for things, we have to often go way, up
Right.
to the national government to get that done and taken
Well,
care of.
and that's why the Department of Education was invented, was created in
Right.
the first place, was for that enforcement of civil rights. I mean, we forget those history pieces. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And these things are very specific to local areas. And so, that's one thing as I've been researching and trying to understand, a little bit about these types of issues in Wisconsin, you know, our school boards don't have any taxing authority in our area. They cannot levy taxes in North Carolina. And so like they have to go through the county commissioners, and the county commissioners have to work with the school board to determine all of that. So it's a very different situation. We also have countywide districts instead of there being like for the most part, we have countywide districts because of civil rights and court orders in the past. And so around desegregation. And so it's just very different, from one area to the next. But that's why that research and understanding the complexities of issues is so important, because none of this is a one size fits all, for any location anywhere in the country.
Well, and we have to advocate for others. That's the one thing I've learned over the years is I might be in an anomaly district where, we're shielded in some way from some of it. Um, and yet I have to fight the fight for the others when I go to the polls or when I'm speaking to legislators. Just like I want them to fight the fight for me. There might be districts that don't have any issues with, well, I think we all have issues with special education funding, but I mean, we might have it more than they do. And I have to build those relationships to say, let's work together. I see where you're struggling and I can support you, and here's where I'm struggling and can you support me?
And that's that idea of neighbor being a much more, a moral term instead of it being a true geographic term. Dawn, you had unmuted.
Yeah, Dawn here.
Yes.
One of my concerns is, I guess, on the national scene, because we were talking about education, and now our Department of Education might go away. I think of immigration and what's going on with these deportations, where a young person can be on the street and deported, and it might seem like so far away from us, but it's not.
Right.
And yet I feel so helpless.
Hmm.
Uh, I know that the representative for our area in Congress is, well, he's MAGA 2.0. And a lot of these other, you have one of our senators who is completely off the rails. How do we, is it out of our hands where we can say and do nothing? Or is there some way that we can? I don't want to be scattershot. I don't want to be so on a soapbox that nobody hears.
Hmm.
So I want to be effective. And yet I see all this playing out nationally that's really going to harm people at Gibraltar, at other schools. The Social Security, we have a lot of seniors up here. That's going to harm them if they can't access their money. There's just so many areas, and they're all coming at us at once.
Right.
We don't have representatives here that are sympathetic to that. They think this is a wonderful thing, and they are supportive of the actions of the executive branch. So I guess my question is,
I feel your pain with that, and unfortunately, in too many ways. Yes, yes. Go ahead.
just I don't know where to go with all of that.
Yeah,
That's my question.
it is hard, and I don't necessarily. I wish I had an easy solution to say this is what you do exactly. But I think a couple of points is one, it is important that we continue to speak out, even if we don't think they're listening. When we're making phone calls to our legislators at a federal level, especially, they are tally marking how many people are calling for or against things. And so those calls do count. It may not seem like a lot, but being able to call, one issue, don't call and give them a laundry list. Call and give them, this is the one thing I'm calling about today. And I want, I'm in support or against whatever it is, because they're tally marking that and giving them your zip code or telling them, I'm a constituent, that type of thing. That really has a lot of power. That is, one of the best things that we can do at a federal level. Same thing with your senators. I mean, I know North Carolina's are very similar. It's frustrating. The other thing I'll say though is when I was in DC a couple weeks ago, I went around and met with all 16 of North Carolina's, or walked by, went to, visited the offices for all 16 of North Carolina's congressional offices. So our two senators and our 14 House districts. and I got the card for who their education person is. And so, I have that information. And so I can contact that person directly, who is the policy person for the issue that I care about. So if you call and you ask for the person who works on Senator so and so's, education person or their immigration person, they have particular staff people who work on those issues. Not all of them are, they're not generalists. Most of them are very specific in one policy area or maybe two. And so you can call and ask for that person specifically what their phone number is, what their email address is, and directly connect with them, which often gets you a little bit more than a canned answer, because they're a little bit more familiar with things. The senators just send out canned answers so often. But you might have a little bit better luck calling and talking with that person or setting up a Zoom call, asking for a meeting with the policy person can be really helpful. Even just to feel heard, which is important for us. That is sustaining the work. One of the things I'll say too that's been helpful is this is a book. Well, it's not showing it, but the same one on the screen. It's brand new. I just read it recently. Actually, on the way up to DC a couple weeks ago, I read it on the train. Um, Activating the Common Good. It is a great resource to change our thinking around this work and helping us to sustain the work. I found it very encouraging and uplifting. It would be a great book study, small group study or, book club type thing. It's not a long read at all, but it was just really practical and helped me, continue to rethink what it means to be about the common good, which I think is for me is that piece of faith. Without it being a Bible study book, it really relates well for me into the work of, of faith. This is another new resource that I think would be really interesting with what you're talking about, Dawn. And it comes out, I think, next week, by Dr. Liz Theo Harris, who's with the Poor People's Campaign and the Kairos Center at Union Seminary in New York. You only get what you're organized to take. And this is she said it's a collection of stories around work that people have been doing to bring change to their neighborhoods around poverty. I was actually on a Zoom call with her this afternoon, specifically um, meeting her for the first time in Zoom person. Um, so it was really neat to hear her talk about this book, and I'm really excited to get to read it when it comes out next week. Just because I think it will be inspirational, which I need to be able to sustain the work. The other thing I'll say is even when it seems like you're shouting into the darkness or shouting into it's not making a difference type work, it doesn't change us that way. Like if we speak out and we continue to talk about what matters to us, that helps it to not change who we are. It allows us to say we're not crazy for wanting the common good for people. It's the world that's crazy, not us. And as people of faith, I really need that these days, and I need others doing that for me so I can do that for them as well. And so, if that, I don't know that that makes a whole lot of sense, but like just continuing to remind ourselves that this is not normal and this is not okay. And I refuse to accept the reality that dehumanizes people and says it's okay for them to be, impoverished and that it's okay to make laws that put them in situations of poverty. I mean, those are all policy choices. I don't accept that as okay. And I have to constantly say that to myself and to others. And by being brave and speaking up, we allow others to see that bravery and borrow that bravery and have it for themselves. So every time we put ourselves, you know, out there, whether it's an op-ed or a social media post or a TV interview or wherever it is that we're speaking, we're giving hope and courage to others to do the same. And that is also really, really important these days. Even if that doesn't change the crazy legislator that you don't like, that you really wish wasn't in office, it is still really, really important. I know we're just about out of time. Were we supposed to be done at 6:15 or 5:15 for your time, Dawn? I don't remember exactly what we said. You're on mute. Yes, okay. Let me just give you a couple more resources really quickly. Christian nationalism is a piece of this that we all need to be understanding and learning more about. If you're not familiar with Christian nationalism, it is a huge, huge, huge piece of what we're seeing happening in the country, what has been happening for 50 years or more. And it is really important as people of faith that we are speaking out against it because we are the ones who can do that. To say this is not the Christianity that we believe in. This is not what we believe is what Jesus was teaching. So that's really, really important. These books, if you click on them, they have links to the books. They're great, great options to learn more about. This is another really great option. Christians Against Christian Nationalism is doing some really important work. And so this is Amanda Tyler's new book about that. Um, Highly recommend it. It's another really practical book around, how to combat Christian nationalism in your community. And so then this is some information around writing postcards. If you're going to write your legislators, I've tried to put together some step by step. The biggest thing is, focus on one thing. If you want to talk about a whole bunch of different issues, write them a whole bunch of different letters. These shouldn't necessarily be laundry lists of, I want you to change A and B and C and D and E. Give them one thing, make it manageable, for yourself and for them. And hearing from you more than once is a good thing. Um, here's some other, the ask is what's really important. Ask them for what you want because they're expecting that. They want to know what you're asking for, especially if you meet with legislators or their staff, which is great to meet with their staff if you can't meet with the legislator directly. Sometimes that's, like I said, more helpful. Um, the ask is what they're expecting. So don't be afraid to ask for what you want. It's really important. But also keep these letters or keep this writing civil. You do want to share what you're thinking, but do it in a way that builds relationship, hopefully, with them and not that, comes across as just rude and mean. Um, and thank them in advance for what you expect them to do. Like you're asking them to do something, thank them for doing that, even if it's, in advance. It's helpful. Um, for op-eds, here's some other advice. This is a great opportunity for letters to the editor, LTEs, or op-eds, getting stuff published, especially if you have local newspapers, local newsletters, online publications, online magazines, things like that in your community. There's a lot of different ways to get things out there. And so really look at, be creative in where you might send information to publish. So here's a couple of examples that I've included for you. The big thing is getting things out in timely fashion. If an issue is coming up in the legislature or a vote is getting ready to happen or a bill gets passed or is up for passing, addressing it immediately. Don't wait a week. Do it the next, to be published the next day. So that is the hard part of this work is being really timely with it. And also name your legislators. If you're going to write something in public, especially like in the newspaper, be sure you name who you're targeting. Like, hey, as a constituent of Senator blah, 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 I really hope that, be very, very specific because they have staff who are looking for their name in print to find out what people are saying about them. So while the legislator may never see the article, their staff will. I'm confident that that happens. And so they want to know, that what people are saying. So be sure to include them. And then I just had a quick benediction to be able to share with you all if there's other questions. So I just want to stop real quick before we go to a benediction and see if there's other questions that I can answer. I know this was a lot of material.
Just process, Suzanne.
Yes.
You've recorded this. Will you send it in a way that I can then share it with people? There were some people who asked, if it was going to be recorded because they couldn't be here and they would
Yes.
like to avail themselves of this teaching.
Yes. I will take the recording when we're done here in just a minute and put it if it's okay with you all, I'll put it up on our YouTube channel and then I can send you the link for it if that's okay.
That'd be perfect.
Okay.
And then for the Thursday meeting, if you could send me another Zoom link, I'll do the same thing. I'll put it here just in case we have people who can't access it except to come to the church.
That's great. I will be sure to do that. And I will also, when I send you the email, I'll send you the link of the slides in PDF, and that way you all will have them to look at and click on and, be able to go back through in case there's, things you want to check out or more information, that type of thing.
Thank you.
Dawn, I feel like there's all these ideas or things that have been presented. Is there going to be a follow-up to this? Because it seems like we do a lot of talking and nothing happens. And so I'm just wondering, will there be an opportunity maybe after now I probably won't show up for it, but after, that goes. But I'm saying, like, anybody who wants to, I just feel like I'd like to, but I would have to go home and walk my dog and all that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
I think we will after the second session, which is on Thursday, which is a repeat of this. We'll find a way to get a group in here and talk about this.
Okay.
And I'm thinking even that book we might want to do. I said I'm not doing any more Bible studies because I'm a short timer here, but I might do a book study.
And I was going to say, this is really short. Let me look here how long it even is. It's super short, but it was just really good. It's like 150 pages, but it's really, I think it would be a really quick read, but it's just chock full of good ideas. It's 10 chapters, but you could do it probably in 2 sessions even. Just have people read it and get together and talk about it. One of the groups that I work with, a friend of mine leads, they do an action hour each week. And I'm not suggesting a weekly thing, but what they do is get together every Friday morning at 11 and on Zoom. And so it's statewide and they talk about one particular issue. And then when they've talked about 10 minutes about, specific action that they're going to take. And then they literally mute themselves on Zoom, turn off their cameras, and everybody stops and makes phone calls right then, or writes their email or writes their letter to the editor right then. And then, at 11:45 or whatever, however long it is, that they take, they'll all get back on the call, unmute, put their cameras back on and share, hey, I spoke to so and so in so and so's office. This is what they said. Here's what I did. They hold each other accountable to doing the phone calls and the actions over Zoom. And it's a really effective thing. It started out of COVID and the ability to, keep each other doing the work during COVID. And it has lasted every week since then, for 4 years now or something. It's pretty amazing. But every Friday they get together and it's not complicated, but they say, hey, we're all going to make calls on hunger today. We're all going to call for, so and so, our legislator's office or our local person's office and ask them to support, whatever hunger initiative is that somebody, talks about that week. So it doesn't always have to be complicated, to do it. You can get together at the church. That's awesome. I think doing this type of thing in person is really much more fun, and much more encouraging to do it together. But sometimes it may just be jump on a Zoom call together and say, hey, we're going to spend 10 minutes writing, the next 10 minutes just together, but writing. So, well, let me share this blessing with you, um, for the journey ahead. And you may have heard this before, but may God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half truths, and superficial relationships, so that we will live deeper in our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, exploitation, or injustice, oppression, abuse, and exploitation of people and the earth, so that we will work for justice, equity, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with I'll get my screen where I can see it. With tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we will reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to think that we can make a difference in the world, so that we can do the things which others say cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all our children and the poor. Amen. Thank you
That's,
so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
oh, thank you so much, Suzanne. We really appreciate your wisdom and all that you put into this, and your research gave us a lot to think about.
Well,
Very nice.
I hope it's helpful and not overwhelming. And I'm going to stop the recording real quick.